There's a certain silence that fills a house when a lie starts to rot in it. It isn't loud or sudden. It seeps in the way dampness spreads through wood. You don't notice at first. You just feel colder, smaller, like you've somehow stopped belonging in your own home. That's what our house became with Daniel, a quiet museum of excuses. Every smile rehearsed, every word weighed, every evening polished to look normal. Let's say his name was Daniel, my husband, the man his mother called her golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, even when his wrongs piled up high enough to block the sunlight. From the moment I joined that family, I was the outsider who needed to understand how they are. They said it with warmth, but the warmth had sharp edges. At first, I played along. I smiled at Sunday dinners where conversations circled endlessly around Daniel's potential, his stress, his big plans that never seemed to exist anywhere outside his own mouth. And when I tried to bring up bills, deadlines, or anything remotely real, the room went quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you said something indecent. His mother would glance at him, then at me, like I'd embarrassed him in front of his fans. Still, I kept trying. I told myself that patience was the high road, that love meant covering for the other person until they caught up. When Daniel missed payments, I said it was a rough patch. When he came home smelling like a mix of whiskey and cologne that wasn't mine, I told myself it was just stress. I wanted to believe that marriage meant standing by your partner through everything. What I didn't realize then was that everything shouldn't include being turned into the family scapegoat. They blamed me for everything, quietly at first, then openly. If Daniel forgot an anniversary, his sister would joke that I was too career-focused to remind him. When his mother found out he'd maxed out a credit card, she called me in tears, not because her son had lied to her, but because I should have stopped him. It was surreal. They built a whole religion around his mistakes, and I was their convenient devil. Daniel didn't defend me. He didn't have to. His silence did the job. He'd look away, rub his temples, and let me drown in their sympathy for him. And I kept hoping that one day he'd snap out of it, that he'd finally say, "Stop blaming her, I messed up." But that day never came. Instead, I learned to speak less, smile more, and breathe through the ache that came from pretending this was normal. The night of his birthday was supposed to fix things. I told myself that if I made everything perfect, the dinner, the guests, the laughter, maybe they'd see who I really was. Maybe Daniel would see me too, not as the keeper of his mess, but as his partner. The table was set, the candles lit, the kind of quiet optimism that hurts more than despair humming in my chest. And then, as the first toast was raised, the doorbell rang. Everyone turned. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade. When I opened the door, I didn't know her yet. The woman standing there with swollen eyes, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She said my husband's name with a voice that cracked halfway through. In that instant, before anyone understood who she was, something inside the room shifted. The air changed. The story we'd all been living in, the perfect son, the patient wife, the happy family, began to crumble, one silent second at a time. Something had arrived that none of us were ready for. For a long moment, nobody moved. The sound of the doorbell still hung in the air, too loud, too sudden, a tiny fracture in the perfect image I'd tried to build that night. I could feel every pair of eyes at the table watching me, waiting for me to make it go away the way I usually did. Smile, host, control the narrative. I always did. But when I opened the door, the illusion broke. She was standing there, a woman in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, her hair damp from the drizzle outside, her lips trembling like she'd rehearsed this moment and still couldn't get the words out. Her eyes were swollen, her mascara blurred, but what caught me wasn't the sadness. It was the guilt, heavy, unfiltered, visible from the doorway. Behind me, the dining room was glowing gold from the candles, laughter still spilled from it, jagged and nervous. The scent of roast chicken and cinnamon filled the air, mixing with her perfume, something faintly floral, too delicate for a night like this. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I'd chosen the same scent for our anniversary 2 years ago. Daniel's voice broke through the quiet, too casual, too quick. "Honey, who is it?" I turned. He was halfway out of his chair, napkin still in hand, smile frozen. The moment his eyes met hers, the color drained from his face. It was so small, so fleeting, but I saw it. The kind of recognition you can't fake or explain away. His mother didn't notice. She was busy arranging her pearls and trying to appear gracious for whatever polite surprise had arrived. His sister, though, she noticed. Her mouth tightened, her fork clinked against her plate, and she gave Daniel a look that said, "What have you done this time?" The woman's voice cracked. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Her fingers were trembling as she clutched the strap of her purse. I didn't know there would be people." "People?" His mother laughed lightly, the kind of social reflex that fills empty air. "Darling, we're celebrating Daniel's birthday. You must be a friend." Friend. The word hung there, sharp enough to cut. The woman looked straight at Daniel, and in that moment I felt it. The shift. Something unspoken passed between them, like the invisible current before lightning strikes. Everyone at the table felt it too, even if they pretended not to. Daniel finally stood, his chair scraping back with a sound that made me flinch. "Maybe we should talk outside," he said, voice low, almost pleading, but the woman shook her head. "I think they should hear," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying a secret too long. A pulse started beating in my throat, fast and uneven. My hands were cold. I didn't want to know what she meant, but part of me already did. Every late night, every vague excuse, every apology that never quite matched the crime, it all started falling into place. His mother's smile faltered. "Daniel," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, "what's going on?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. I felt everyone watching me, waiting for my reaction, my humiliation, my next move. The air was thick enough to choke on. I took a step back, steadying myself on the edge of the doorway. All I could think was how perfectly arranged the table looked. Candles flickering, the birthday cake untouched, 27 years of his mother's pride shining in those crystal glasses, and how none of it mattered anymore. The woman's eyes filled again. "I just needed to tell you," she whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. "I can't do this anymore." That was the moment the room stopped breathing. Fork stilled midair, his mother's hand flew to her chest. And Daniel looked at me like a man caught between worlds, already calculating which truth would hurt him less. And I realized, standing there in the doorway, that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was exposure of him, of them, of every carefully crafted lie they'd used to build their perfect family. The house had gone quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that happens right before everything falls apart. Something had arrived at that dinner. Not a person, not even a revelation, but a reckoning. And deep down, I think Daniel knew it was long overdue. Long before the doorbell, before the trembling woman and the ruined birthday cake, there were smaller betrayals. The kind that hide under everyday life, too ordinary to recognize as danger. Looking back, I can see how quietly it all started. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with charm. Let's say Daniel and I met in a season that made everything seem like fate. Autumn, golden light slanting through cafe windows, him laughing too loud at his own jokes. He was one of those men who make you feel seen, not deeply, but brightly, like standing under a spotlight that keeps moving. He told me I made him want to be better, and I believed him. The warning signs look too much like affection when you're young enough to confuse the two. His family came into the picture early. They had that rehearsed politeness people mistake for warmth. His mother, elegant and calculated, always touching Daniel's arm when she spoke, as if she owned a piece of him the rest of the world wasn't allowed to borrow. His sister, younger but already carrying the same sharp tone, the same habit of testing me with questions disguised as compliments. "You work full-time? Good for you." Most women would prefer something less stressful. I laughed, pretended it didn't sting. Daniel brushed it off. "That's just how she jokes." When we got engaged, His mother threw a party so big it could have been mistaken for a campaign launch. I remember standing in that glittering crowd, everyone toasting Daniel's future, while my name floated somewhere in the background like decoration. She told everyone how lucky he was, then whispered to me, "I hope you can keep up with him." It sounded sweet at first, until I realized she wasn't joking. After the wedding, the real version of them started to appear in pieces. They'd call him every day, sometimes twice. If he didn't answer, I'd hear about it later. "Why are you keeping him so busy? He used to be more relaxed before marriage." Subtle at first, then sharper. They never said, "You're the problem." They just made sure the space between us filled with enough implication to make me feel like one. When Daniel's work began slipping, missed deadlines, bad reviews, a quiet demotion no one wanted to name, they rewrote the story in an instant. "He's distracted," his mother said over lunch one Sunday, stirring her coffee as if she were narrating a play. "Marriage changes a man's focus." His sister added, "He used to be so driven. Maybe he just needs less pressure." They were talking to me, not about him. And Daniel, he sat there in silence, eyes fixed on his plate, letting me drown in their judgment. I started carrying the weight of their disappointment like it was part of my vows. I worked extra hours to cover his late fees, hid bank statements so his mother wouldn't see, laughed through dinners where every question felt like an interrogation. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a wife and became a public relations manager for the family brand. Even our home became an extension of their control. His mother had opinions on everything: the curtains, the dishes, the way I folded towels. Once she accidentally dropped by with groceries, saying, "I just thought you might need help, since Daniel's been so tired lately." I thanked her, but later found she'd rearranged my pantry. That night, Daniel told me I was overreacting. "She's just trying to help." It's amazing how many small humiliations you can excuse when you love someone. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that he'd find his footing again, that once he did, his family would stop blaming me. But the truth is, they needed me to be the problem. It kept Daniel perfect in their eyes. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It arrived in whispers, the late-night texts he hid behind work excuses, the empty spaces in our conversations, the cold distance that settled into our bed like a third presence. I wanted to believe we could still fix it, that we just needed time, but every day with him started to feel like waiting for an apology that never came. By the time his birthday arrived, I wasn't planning a party for him anymore. I was building one last illusion, a desperate, glittering attempt to prove that all my patience hadn't been for nothing. I thought if I could make everything perfect, maybe I could still hold our world together. But lies have a way of finding the door, and that night, one of them knocked. If someone had told me then that the cracks were already too deep to fix, I wouldn't have believed them. I was still convinced that if I just kept smiling, if I handled everything the right way, the universe would eventually reward me for my effort. That's the curse of being the responsible one. You think the world operates on logic? It doesn't. It runs on narratives, and Daniel's family had written theirs long before I ever entered the frame. After his demotion, the story became painfully simple. He was overworked. I was too ambitious. I started waking up earlier, cooking breakfast, leaving encouraging notes like some overcompensating sitcom wife. He'd barely look up from his phone. At dinner, he'd zone out completely, fingers tapping his glass instead of answering me. His mother called nightly, her voice syrupy with concern. For him, not us. "She worries," Daniel said once, half smiling, half tired. "She controls," I almost replied, but didn't. I stopped arguing. What was the point? Every disagreement became a trial with his family as the silent jury. If I raised my voice, I was hysterical. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. There was no version of me that could win in their eyes, so I folded into myself, polite, composed, endlessly patient, the kind of patience that eats at your bones. Then came the little disappearances. First it was working late, then drinks with coworkers. He'd come home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine, and I'd tell myself it lingered from a crowded bar. I'd watch him undress, drop his shirt in the laundry, and feel a strange mix of sadness and pity. For him, for myself, for the version of us that had existed only in theory. Still, I kept playing my role. When his family visited, I hosted like nothing was wrong. I baked, decorated, even laughed at their jokes. His mother once complimented my table setting. "You're finally learning our family style." I smiled and thanked her, while inside I felt like wallpaper. Decorative, replaceable, easily ignored. There was one moment that still replays in my head. A Sunday morning, soft light spilling through the kitchen window. I found an unfamiliar mug in the dishwasher. Plain white, but not ours. When I asked Daniel, he said, "Maybe a friend stopped by." His tone was casual, too casual, and the words felt rehearsed. That was when something small and sharp inside me finally shifted. I didn't argue. I just nodded, dried the mug, and placed it on the counter. But that silence wasn't peace. It was the beginning of distance. Over the next months, the house changed. It became quieter, but heavier. He moved through rooms like a guest, always distracted, always half elsewhere. I filled the space with busyness, organizing drawers, repainting walls, pretending that productivity could drown out emptiness. His family still dropped by, offering sympathy wrapped in criticism. "You two just need balance," his mother said. "Daniel thrives when he's supported," meaning try harder. When his birthday approached, I told myself this was my chance to reset everything. A clean slate. I planned every detail. The menu, the guest list, the candles. I spent nights scrolling through old photos of us, trying to remember what joy used to feel like. I found one picture from our first year together, him looking at me like I was the center of his world. I stared at it for a long time before realizing that somewhere along the way, that look had vanished. Still, I chose hope. I bought his favorite wine, polished the silverware, even ironed the tablecloth his mother had given us as a wedding gift. When I stepped back to admire the setup, the room looked beautiful, almost cinematic, the kind of perfection people envy from afar. But underneath, I could feel it. That hum, that quiet dissonance that meant something was already unraveling. I remember standing by the window that afternoon, watching the sky darken and thinking, just get through tonight. If I could make this one night perfect, maybe everything else would fall back into place. Maybe they'd finally see me the way I wanted to be seen. Steady, loyal, good. But that's the irony of trying to save appearances. The more effort you put into keeping the surface flawless, the closer the cracks come to the light. And when the doorbell rang that night, it wasn't just the sound of someone arriving. It was the echo of every ignored instinct, every swallowed question, every tiny betrayal finally demanding to be heard. The silence after her confession didn't feel like stillness. It felt like pressure, like the air itself was pushing down on all of us. No one spoke for several long seconds. The candles flickered, shadows jumping across the tablecloth, and I realized every person in that room was trying to rewrite the moment in their own head, searching for a version where it still made sense. Daniel finally broke first. "Let's talk privately," he muttered, his voice thin, almost childlike. He grabbed the woman's arm, too quickly, too familiar, and that single motion was enough to make the truth undeniable. His mother gasped quietly. His sister's fork dropped, clattering against her plate. The woman pulled her arm free. "No," she said, and her voice, though trembling, carried a kind of exhausted strength. "I've been quiet long enough." That's when his mother stood, still clinging to her dignity like it was oxygen. "I don't know what this is," she said sharply, "but it's inappropriate. Daniel, make her leave." I watched him glance at her, then at me. Two women on opposite sides of the same delusion. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence screamed louder than any denial could have. The woman's tears finally broke. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," she said, looking at me, not them. I just thought she deserved to know. Her voice cracked on that last word, and the weight of it hit me like a physical blow. For a split second, I could hear everything at once. The ticking clock in the hall, the faint hiss of candles, my own pulse in my ears. Then came his mother's voice, sharp and shaking. "This isn't true. "Daniel, tell her it's not true." He didn't. He just stood there, pale, motionless, the kind of stillness that comes from knowing the fight is already lost. His sister was the next to recover, slipping into her usual tone, soft, fake empathy, wrapped in accusation. "You're misunderstanding something," she told me, as if I'd wandered into their play and forgotten my lines. "Daniel's been under pressure. He needs support, not drama." Support. That word again. As if my role in their family had always been to absorb whatever damage Daniel caused and make it look like healing. I laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp, almost foreign. "Support?" I repeated. "You mean pretending, covering? Because if that's what you call support, then I've been your dream daughter-in-law." His mother's face hardened. "Watch your tone." There it was, the phrase she'd used so many times before, the one that always pulled me back into submission. But something inside me didn't obey this time. I wasn't going to shrink back into politeness, not when my life had just been publicly dismantled in front of the people who had built their comfort out of my silence. The woman, his lover though she hadn't said it yet, reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded envelope. "He told me you were separated," she whispered. "He said it was over months ago." She placed it on the table in front of me like an offering. Inside, I could see a photo. Daniel with her, smiling, his hand on her waist, sunlight behind them, the kind of smile he hadn't given me in years. No one moved. His mother's fingers twitched like she wanted to snatch it away, erase it. His sister whispered, "That can't be real." But Daniel didn't argue. He just stared at the floor. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a betrayal between husband and wife. It was a collapse of an entire ecosystem built on denial. His family's version of him couldn't survive the truth, so they did what they always did. They turned on me. His mother pointed a trembling hand toward the door. "Leave. You've brought enough humiliation into this family." For a heartbeat, I thought she was talking to him, but then her eyes locked on me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My throat burned, my hands shook, but my voice, when it finally came, was calm, almost too calm. "You know what's funny?" I said softly. "You've spent years blaming me for his mistakes, and now that you see one you can't explain away, you still find a way to make it mine." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Daniel finally whispered, "Please, stop." And that's when I understood something simple and devastating. He wasn't asking her to stop. He was asking me, because in his world, silence was still the only way to keep the peace. But peace built on lies was never peace at all. It was a cage. And standing there, in front of that trembling woman and that furious family, I felt the first small fracture of the bars. Something inside me, something that had been buried under years of apology, started to wake up. The silence after I spoke felt endless. I could almost hear the weight of my own heartbeat, pressing against the walls. The woman, the one Daniel had promised the same half-truths he used to feed me, stood near the doorway, trembling, mascara streaking down her cheeks, but she looked lighter somehow, like she'd just dropped a secret she'd been dying to set down. Daniel's mother moved first, gripping the back of a chair like she might faint, though the performance was as deliberate as always. "You don't have to stay here for this circus," she told Daniel, her tone dripping with martyrdom. "Come with us, we'll handle it privately." Privately. Their favorite word. It meant bury it, pretend it never happened, polish the lie until it gleamed again. Daniel didn't move. His eyes darted between me and the woman, then to his sister, who already had her phone in hand as though she could text the scandal out of existence. "Mom, please," he said weakly. "Just stop." She blinked at him, hurt and disbelief flickering across her face. "Don't talk to me that way. She's humiliating us." "She?" I said quietly. "You mean him. He's the one who invited her into our lives, not me." Her expression tightened. "Watch your language. You sound unhinged." That word, unhinged, landed like a slap, the same one they'd used before, when I dared to confront their golden boy about his gambling, his drinking, his lies. Every time I tried to pull truth into the light, they'd labeled me dramatic, emotional, unstable. It was their easiest defense. If they discredited my sanity, they never had to face their own. I laughed under my breath, a sound somewhere between rage and exhaustion. Unhinged, I repeated. That's what you call a woman who finally stops cleaning up everyone else's mess. Daniel's sister rose now, her posture stiff with cold superiority. You're making this worse for yourself, she said. Everyone's had enough of your drama. Maybe it's best if you leave before you embarrass yourself further. Embarrass myself. The irony stung. I looked around the table, half-empty glasses, melting candles, the untouched cake glistening like a monument to denial. The guests had already shrunk into their seats, pretending to be invisible, chewing in slow motion to avoid picking sides. The smell of burnt wax mixed with perfume, heavy and nauseating. Then the woman, the lover, spoke again, voice soft but firm. I didn't know he was married, I swear. He told me it was over. His mother hissed, "Be quiet," but the woman didn't. She turned to me and said, "I'm so sorry, I thought I was helping him through something. I didn't realize I was helping him lie." Quote. Her words cracked something in me. Not anger this time, but clarity. For years, I'd tried to earn their respect by shrinking smaller, talking softer, pretending not to notice the cruelty disguised as care. And now, standing in that golden light with everything exposed, I finally saw the truth. Their loyalty was never to Daniel's happiness, only to the image of him they'd invented. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, voice breaking. Can we just end this, please? I stared at him, at the man who had spent years letting me carry the weight of his failures. You always want to end things when they stop serving you, I said quietly. But you started this. And for once, you don't get to decide how it ends. His mother let out a sharp gasp, like she'd been struck. How dare you talk to him that way? I met her gaze. How dare you raise a man who hides behind women every time life gets hard? For the first time, she didn't have an answer. The words hung there, brittle and final. The woman stepped back, murmured something about leaving, but I stopped her with a small gesture. No, I said. You don't have to leave. I think we've all heard enough lies tonight. It's time they heard the truth, too. Daniel's face went pale. What truth? He asked, though he already knew. That your affair wasn't the first lie, I said, just the one you couldn't control. The air turned thick again, full of unsaid things and the faint hum of a breaking world. I could feel the weight of every year pressing against my chest, but beneath it, beneath the exhaustion, the betrayal, there was something else beginning to grow. It wasn't anger, it was strength, quiet, unfamiliar, and irreversible. That night, in the middle of his perfectly planned dinner, surrounded by the people who had built their comfort on my silence, I stopped being the family scapegoat. I stopped defending him. I stopped apologizing. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the beginning of my freedom. The moment after I said those words felt like standing in the eye of a storm, still on the surface, but everything around us spinning, ready to tear apart the illusion they'd spent years protecting. Daniel's mother sat back down slowly, as if gravity itself had turned against her. His sister's phone slipped from her hand and landed face down on the table with a dull thud. The lover stood frozen near the door, one hand hovering near the handle, torn between fleeing and witnessing the aftermath of the truth she'd just unleashed. Daniel's face was ghost white. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked on the first syllable. You're twisting this, he said weakly. You're making it sound worse than cheating on your wife, I cut in. Go ahead, Daniel. Explain how that sounds better. The words hung between us, sharp and clean. I'd never heard my own voice carried like that, steady, deliberate, free of the usual tremor that came from trying not to upset anyone. Every muscle in my body was trembling, but not from fear, from release. His mother slammed her hand on the table. Enough! You will not destroy this family with your drama. This family destroyed itself, I said. You just refused to notice. Her mouth opened, but I kept talking. I wasn't giving her a chance to redirect the narrative again. For years, you've turned every one of his mistakes into my responsibility. When he drank too much, it was because I was too demanding. When he missed work, I was too controlling. When he lied, I provoked him. You built an entire mythology to protect him, and you used me as the villain to keep the story alive. She shook her head, trembling. You're ungrateful. We treated you like family. No, I said softly. You treated me like a mirror you couldn't stand to look into. The lover made a small sound, not quite a sob, more like an exhale after holding her breath too long. Daniel's sister whispered, "This is insane," under her breath, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she could feel it. The script was unraveling, the performance collapsing under its own weight. Daniel tried again. "Can we please not do this here?" His voice was low, pleading. "We can fix it." "Fix it?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You can't fix something you built on lies, Daniel. You don't fix rot. You tear it down and start over." His mother stood up again, her voice rising now, brittle with panic. "You think you're the victim here? He was under pressure. He needed support." "Support?" I said quietly. "You keep using that word like it's supposed to mean devotion, but in your language it means sacrifice. My dignity, my sanity." For the first time that night, Daniel's composure cracked. "You don't understand what it's like," he snapped. "You don't know what it's like to have everyone expect you to be perfect all the time." His mother gasped. "Daniel." "No, let him finish," I said, stepping closer. "Tell me, Daniel, was it perfection you were chasing when you lied to me? When you let them blame me for every failure you made? Or when you started seeing her?" He looked at me like a cornered animal, eyes darting to the lover, the woman who now looked too small, too human to be his excuse. He took a step forward, lowering his voice, trying to reclaim the authority he thought he'd lost. "You're twisting everything. You always have." Something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. "No," I said. "I'm finally straightening it out." The room went deathly quiet. His family sat frozen, their perfect dining room turning into a crime scene of broken illusions. The chandelier above us flickered, one bulb dimming as if even the light was tired of pretending. I turned to his mother. "You always said the truth comes out in the wash. Well, here it is, dirty and unfiltered. Take a good look." Her eyes glistened with fury. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll finally regret something real." I walked toward the doorway, brushing past Daniel. He reached for my arm, instinctive, desperate, but I stepped out of his grasp. The lover moved aside, her face pale and trembling. I paused beside her and whispered, "You should leave too. You don't owe them anything." She nodded, barely, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Behind us, Daniel's mother's voice cracked through the silence. "You're not part of this family anymore." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "I was never really allowed to be," I said. "You just needed someone to blame." And with that, I walked out of the room, out of their story, while behind me, the echoes of their denial collapsed into noise. I didn't know then what came next, only that, for the first time in years, the sound of my own footsteps felt like freedom. I walked straight into the night air without a coat. The chill hit me like a slap, but it felt clean, real, after all the suffocating warmth inside. The laughter, the candles, the smell of overcooked dinner, it all clung to me like smoke. Behind the closed door, I could still hear the muffled sound of voices, rising and falling in panic, their perfect family portrait splintering in real time. For years, I'd imagined leaving as a kind of defeat, but in that moment, the sidewalk under my heel sounded like a drumbeat. Every step said, "Mine." I didn't go far. I stood under the porch light, the rain misting down, my breath visible in the cold. Through the window, I saw his mother pacing, his sister crying into her phone, Daniel hunched over the table with his head in his hands. The lover, still standing near the doorway, caught my eye for a fraction of a second. She looked like someone who'd just realized she'd been written into the wrong story. I almost pitied her. Almost. My phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. His mother this time. I turned it face down on the railing. The glow blinked once, then went dark. The door opened behind me. Daniel stepped out, voice low, cracked around the edges. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. "You already said enough." He exhaled, shoving his hands into his pockets like a guilty teenager. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." That made me laugh. Short, bitter, real. "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after it." He flinched. "You always twist things." "No," I said quietly. "I just finally said them out loud." He took a step closer. "They'll never forgive you for this." "Good," I said. "Now they'll finally stop pretending they loved me." He tried to reach for my arm again, but I stepped back. The porch light flickered above us, casting his face in brief flashes. The charming man I once fell in love with, now stripped of all his borrowed light. "You can't just walk away," he said. "Watch me." Inside, his mother's voice called out through the half-open door, shrill with desperation. "Daniel, don't let her ruin everything." He turned halfway toward her, torn, and that was the moment I realized. He would always turn toward her. No matter what happened, his compass pointed home to the people who taught him denial as survival. I left. The rain thickened into a steady curtain, cold against my face, but I didn't care. Each step felt lighter, as if gravity itself had loosened its grip. I didn't have a plan, not yet. No suitcase, no destination, just distance. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Behind me, the house glowed like a lantern, warm, deceptive, full of ghosts. I imagined his mother smoothing her hair, calling relatives, rehearsing the story she'd tell tomorrow. Poor Daniel, betrayed by that unstable wife. They'd all believe her, at least for a while. But the truth was already out, and truth has a way of echoing even through closed doors. As I reached the end of the street, my phone buzzed again. This time a message from the lover. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." I typed 3 words before deleting them, then finally sent just one. "I believe you." Because maybe she really didn't know. Maybe she was another casualty of the same lie. The night swallowed the house behind me. I kept walking, shoes soaked, hair plastered to my face, heart pounding in its new rhythm. Every step hurt, but not the kind of pain that destroys. The kind that heals by tearing you open first. And somewhere between the silence and the rain, I realized the version of me that needed their approval had already died back in that dining room. What walked away was someone else entirely, someone who would never again be their scapegoat. The morning after felt unreal. For the first time in years, I woke up to silence that wasn't heavy. It was clean. No hum of Daniel's alarm, no footsteps pacing in the hall, no phone buzzing with his mother's messages disguised as check-ins. Just me, the faint light through cheap curtains, and the hollow quiet that comes right after a storm. I'd spent the night at a small roadside motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where everything smelled faintly of old coffee and detergent. I didn't even unpack. I just sat on the bed in my dress from the night before, staring at the faded floral wallpaper, letting the exhaustion bleed out of me in waves. It was strange. After so many years of walking on eggshells, real freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt like withdrawal. When I finally slept, it wasn't deep. I kept half waking, expecting his voice, his mother's judgment, the next crisis waiting to erupt. But every time, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the building settling. By morning, I knew I couldn't go back. Not for clothes, not for closure, not for another round of apologies I didn't owe. That house wasn't home. It was a stage set, and I'd finally walked off it. I made coffee from the small machine by the sink and stood by the window watching the world outside. It was early, gray, the kind of sky that looks like it hasn't decided whether to rain or forgive. Cars passed, strangers with their own mornings, their own routines. I wondered if they could tell, if they could look at me and see someone who just ended a life she built, with both hands and too much hope. My phone was full of missed calls. Daniel, his mother, Unknown numbers that were probably family members she'd mobilized overnight. The voicemail count blinked like an accusation. I didn't press play. I already knew the script. "He's sorry. It was a mistake. You should talk. Don't do anything rash." Apologies that meant nothing, because they were born out of exposure, not remorse. Instead, I opened my email and sent a short message to my boss, a woman I trusted more than anyone realized. "I'll be taking some personal time. I'm safe. Please don't share my number if anyone asks." Then I turned the phone off and left it face down on the table. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel the pull of expectation through the screen. Just quiet, just breath. I walked for hours that day, nowhere in particular, through side streets, past empty playgrounds, into a park where the trees were turning brittle and gold. I thought about the woman from last night, how her hands had trembled, how she'd said, "I'm sorry," like it was both confession and punishment. A strange sympathy stirred in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. She was a symptom, not the disease. Somewhere around noon, I stopped by a small bookstore cafe. The barista smiled. No recognition, no judgment. I ordered a tea I didn't really want, just to feel the warmth between my palms. There was a group of older women at a corner table, laughing too loud, interrupting each other with stories. Their joy wasn't perfect. It was messy, alive, real. And I sat there thinking, this is what I've been missing. Being around people who don't demand perfection, who let things be complicated, who don't measure love in sacrifice. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for strength. But strength isn't staying, it's leaving before you're erased. That night, when I checked into a new apartment, small, quiet, barely furnished, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I unpacked the few things I'd brought: my laptop, a sweater, a single framed photo of my mother and me from years ago. I placed it on the windowsill like a promise to myself. Then, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept. No dreams, no waiting for footsteps in the hall. Just stillness, the kind that finally feels earned. 2 days passed before I turned my phone back on. The first sound it made was a flood of notifications, like the past trying to claw its way back. Dozens of missed calls, messages stacked on top of each other like apologies written in panic. The first one I opened was from Daniel. "Please, we need to talk." "I can explain." Then another. "They're making it worse. Mom's furious. I told her I'll fix this." Fix this. The same phrase he'd used for every disaster he'd ever created. Fix it, like betrayal, was just another mess on the kitchen floor for me to wipe away. Then came one from his mother. It started politely. That brittle tone she used when she was trying to sound civil but still remind you who held the power. "You've made things very difficult for Daniel. I hope you understand what you've done to his reputation." There it was. Not a single word about me, or truth, or damage that couldn't be undone. Just reputation. Image, their sacred altar. I didn't reply. I scrolled through them all, message after message, until they blurred into white noise. Then I deleted everything. Watching the screen clear felt like rinsing the last traces of them from my skin. The next morning, a knock on my new door startled me. My body reacted before my brain did, heart racing, palms cold. When I opened it, there was no Daniel, no mother-in-law, no ghost from the past. Just a delivery guy holding a small box. Inside was my wedding ring, placed neatly in a jewelry pouch. No note, no explanation. I stared at it for a long time. The gold looked dull in the light, like even it was tired of pretending to mean something. I set it on the counter, next to the keys for a home I no longer lived in. It didn't deserve to follow me where I was going. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Mornings with coffee, afternoons spent unpacking, evenings walking through the city with no destination. I found myself smiling at small things again. A stray cat that followed me for a block, an elderly couple holding hands at the crosswalk, the sound of rain against the windows. Ordinary peace, the kind that used to feel unreachable. And then, one night, Daniel showed up. I heard his knock before I saw his face. 3 sharp taps. Then, silence. When I opened the door, he looked smaller. Not in size, in presence. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow sort of shame. He held a single envelope in his hand. "I just wanted to give you this," he said, voice low. "It's the paperwork. The divorce." He hesitated like he expected me to beg, to argue, to ask why now. But I didn't. I just nodded. "Is that all?" I asked. He blinked, taken aback. "You're not even going to?" "No," I said. "I've already spent enough of my life reacting to you." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "I didn't mean for things to go this way." "People rarely do," I said. He tried to smile, that same weak, boyish smile that had once disarmed me. "Mom still thinks you'll come back." "Then you should tell her," I said, "that for once she's wrong." He flinched like the words hit harder than he expected. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But pity was just another leash, and I was done wearing them. He left the envelope on the counter and walked away without looking back. I stood there listening to his footsteps fade, the echo growing softer until it disappeared completely. That night, I didn't cry. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights blur against the glass. My reflection looked different, calmer, sharper, like someone I was finally starting to recognize. For years, I'd lived inside a story that wasn't mine, written by people who needed a villain so their hero wouldn't look so small, but that story had ended. And I was still here. The ring was still on the counter beside the paperwork. I took it in my hand one last time, feeling the cold weight of it against my skin. Then I opened the window and let it drop. It hit the pavement below with a sound so soft it barely registered, a tiny metallic whisper marking the end of everything false. And just like that, I exhaled. Not the shaky breath of survival, the steady one of someone who's finally free. Weeks later, I stopped counting days. Time had softened. It no longer felt like a cage built of clocks and expectations. Mornings came with light instead of dread. I'd open the window, breathe in the cold air, and hear the city below. Car horns, footsteps, a dog barking somewhere far away. It wasn't quiet like before. It was alive. My new apartment was small but honest. Sunlight reached the corners without apology. Plants lined the sill. Stubborn little things that somehow kept growing no matter how often I forgot to water them. I liked that about them. They didn't need perfection to survive, just space. I'd started working remotely for a few weeks. My boss had insisted I take time off, but work gave me structure. And structure felt like healing. It was strange how ordinary tasks, emails, coffee breaks, background music, could feel like small proofs of life. Sometimes, the past still tried to visit. A flash of a memory while folding laundry, the smell of his cologne when a stranger passed on the street. But it didn't hollow me out anymore. The memories had lost their teeth. His mother called once, a blocked number I answered by mistake. She didn't start with hello. She went straight into control. "You've made things very hard for Daniel," she said. "He's not the same." I listened, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to hear my own reaction. And when she paused, waiting for guilt, I just said, "Good." Then I hung up. No shaking hands, no racing pulse, just peace. It wasn't revenge. It was recovery. There's a difference. Revenge wants to hurt back. Recovery wants to stop bleeding. I spent my evenings walking by the river, watching the water catch the city lights. Some nights I'd see couples laughing, and it didn't make me bitter. Love itself wasn't the enemy. Self-erasure was. I'd spent years shrinking to fit into someone else's version of devotion. Never again. One evening, I stopped at a bench where an older woman was feeding pigeons. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "You look like someone who just learned how to breathe again." And I realized that's exactly what it felt like. Breathing, fully, deeply, without permission. Daniel didn't disappear completely. He sent one last email. Short, formal, transactional. "I hope you're doing well." I didn't reply. Some stories don't need epilogues. Healing isn't cinematic. It's quiet mornings, small victories, learning to fill your own silence without apology. It's letting joy return on its own terms, not forcing it. I still have nights where I wake up in the dark and wonder how I stayed so long in that house, how many times I mistook tolerance for love. But then I remember, I'm not there anymore, I'm here, and here is enough. The woman he cheated with reached out once, a simple message. I left too. I just typed back, good for you. Not bitterness, solidarity. Two women who finally stepped out of the same lie. The world didn't reward me for leaving. There was no applause, no cinematic music swelling in the background, just peace, which honestly felt better than any applause could. I used to think the opposite of love was hate. It's not, it's clarity. And once you see clearly, you can never unsee again. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary afternoon where nothing hurts anymore. You look up from your cup of coffee and realize you haven't thought about him in hours. Then you realize that peace you're feeling isn't temporary. It's yours. Months passed. The divorce papers came back, stamped and final. I didn't celebrate. I just folded them neatly and tucked them away in a drawer, like an obituary for a version of myself I no longer needed. That chapter didn't deserve rage or fireworks, only closure. I rebuilt life piece by piece, the way you rebuild after a storm, slowly, deliberately, with both hands still shaking but determined. I learned to cook for one without feeling lonely. I learned to sleep diagonally across the bed and not apologize for taking up space. I filled silence with music, not explanations. And one morning, standing in front of the mirror, hair undone, no makeup, sunlight tracing the curve of my face, I smiled. Not the forced kind I used to wear for photographs or family dinners, but the real kind that starts deep in your chest when you finally belong to yourself again. People sometimes ask how long it takes to move on. The truth? As long as it takes to stop believing you were the problem. Once that illusion dies, everything else becomes easier. Daniel and his family faded into rumor. Mutual friends said his mother still talked about the marriage that fell apart, always skipping over the part where her son was the architect of his own ruin. Let her. Every story they tell now will sound hollow, because the truth they refuse to face already lives without them. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine that house, the perfect table setting, the cake half melted, the candles long extinguished. I picture the moment after I walked out, the quiet panic, the blame ricocheting between them like glass shattering. That's their eternity now, trapped inside a lie with no one left to hold it together. Mine is different. Mine is the sound of rain against new windows, the smell of fresh paint, the heartbeat of a life that finally feels like it belongs to me. I still believe in love, just not the kind that demands I disappear to prove it. Real love doesn't need an audience, a cover story, or a scapegoat. It simply stands beside you when the truth gets loud. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Silence may keep the peace, but it never keeps you whole. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Leave, even if your hands tremble. Choose yourself, even if they call it selfish. Because sometimes, the most radical thing you can do, the bravest, most defiant thing, is simply refuse to be blamed for someone else's mistakes ever again. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.